Good morning. Hey, that was all right. Good morning? All right, that's better. Elizabeth and I often joke that this every year is like planning a wedding a little bit. And so instead of doing the wedding dance of endurance where we learn about the poor gal that's been stuck with the guy for too long, let's do it backwards here. For how many people is this your first NECAFS annual meeting? That's amazing. Welcome. All right. How many people were here last year as well? So this year and last year, sorry. I'll get this straight one of these years. Any of the past 3 years? Any of the past 4 years? Keep them up. Have you been? Yeah, any of the past 4 years. So that means this year too. We're going to get there. Any of the past 5 years? Trick question. Welcome. My name's Chris Callahan. I'm with the University of Vermont Extension, and I'm the director of NECAFS. It really is great to have everybody here. This is an amazing showing for the conference, and love reconnecting with everybody every year and connecting with new folks who I only have known by email or voicemail. So to those who are new this year, welcome. It's great to have you here, and for everybody else, thanks for sticking with us. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the background of NECAFS, where we've been, what we did during last year's annual meeting to inform the past year's work. And for people who are really, really familiar with NECAFS, this might be old hat, but some of the feedback we've received in previous evaluations of the meeting said, hey, can we just regroup every year and remind ourselves why we're here? And so that's what this is about. NECAFS exists to enhance produce safety and preventive controls, training, education, and outreach among small and medium-sized farms and small processors in the Northeast. So that's why we're here. Is anybody here for some other meeting? No, we got everybody in the right place. Good. So the way we've approached doing this at NECAFS is, first of all, strive for an inclusive network. And so that means not only university researchers, educators, and extension specialists, but also state regulatory enforcement agency partners, local food and farming organizations, not-for-profits, other community-based organizations, consultants and industry associations, small and medium-sized producers and processors and buyers themselves. So in many cases, that's our educational cohort that we're working for. But also the other regional centers and initiatives, the National Center, or what is now known as the Lead Regional Coordination Center, and our federal sponsoring partners, the USDA and the FDA. So that's a big group of sometimes diverse opinion and voice, and that's what makes this a lot of fun, is all the different perspectives that gather each year here in this room and in the breakouts and in the work groups. Again, we've talked about our goal. We're here to enhance produce safety and preventive controls training for small and medium-sized farms and small processors in the Northeast. The objectives, the way we deploy that goal is through, first of all, establishing a network structure. And so thank you to Elizabeth Newbold, who really serves as that connective glue for this network. She is the one that brings us all together virtually and physically to really share our lessons learned and our resources and to ask each other questions. To build capacity, competency, and collaboration. So that's all about making sure we have training opportunities for educators who are going and doing PSA trainings, so train the trainers, but also PCHF trainings, and some of the supplemental trainings that were never planned for. So some of the things that have come up in previous annual meetings, for example, where we said, you know, the PCHF, the PCQI course would really benefit from this additional resource or this additional exercise. So those are some of the things that come into building capacity, competency, and collaboration. Develop and deliver educational programs. So we support PSA and PCHF and SSA trainings through the Training Support Stipend Program. We were one short on acronyms, so we developed a new one, the TSSP. So We provide support both for training of trainers. So if you're somebody who wants to become trained to deliver a certain program, we can support that. If you are somebody who is short on resources to deliver a training to one of the educational cohorts in our goal, we can also support that. And Elizabeth will talk about the TSSP later. The other thing we do in the objective number 3 is somewhat regular webinars where we informally and virtually get together and share what we've been up to. So that the most recent one was actually was a national review of some FSOP, new acronym, FSOP projects, Food Safety Outreach Program, USDA-funded projects, where we took a look at different projects that people have done around the country. And again, the point here is that we're trying to improve the efficiency of how the work gets done. So someone who's done a supplemental educational activity focused on apple growers in Washington State, that can be applied in New Hampshire or in Rhode Island or in Florida, maybe? I don't know. Sure. Evaluate and assess progress and impact. The second half of this session, we're going to be doing some collaborative exercises, and the point of that is to evaluate what we've been doing and how we've been doing it, and where do you all want to see NECAFS go. So Elizabeth is going to thankfully guide us through that, and that's what you're not supposed to open on the table. And then finally, sustain good work. And the point of this is to make sure if we've done everything that we're supposed to be doing and there's still a need for some of this work, how do we ensure we're able to do it? And so that's certainly funding. It's also everything else that we've outlined in the objectives. It's the capacity, the competency, the collaboration, the structure, the network, and the sharing. So this all started with a relatively small idea in a relatively small group in Amherst, Massachusetts, back in January 2015. It was a group that got together to talk about how we might better coordinate and collaborate to develop resources focused on post-harvest practices. So that's a small part of food safety. But this is where it kind of started, and then we were talking about what we would do. This is a planning grant. We were talking about what we would do if we were able to secure additional funds, and then came along the Regional Center RFA. So in 2015, there was with the FSMA produce safety rule finalization on the horizon, there was this RFA that went out for regional centers. 4 regional centers, Northeast, North Central, Western, and Southern Center, and then a national center and 2 other cohort-specific initiatives. And one of those was the Northeast, and it was looking for some groups to propose ways of enhancing food safety education as we've outlined and as our goal reiterated. And so we put in for that, and what we proposed was exactly what I just reviewed, the objectives that we just reviewed, but in this sort of structure. And what's interesting is revisiting this every year. I haven't changed the blue part of this figure at all, just have added in the red. This is what we plan to do, and the red identifies how that has sort of been implemented. So we do have what we called at the time an executive team. It's sort of morphed into just the PI team of the project. That's myself, Elizabeth Newbold, Betsy Bin from Cornell University, Amanda Kinchla from University of Massachusetts, Luke Laborde from Penn State University, and Chris Walsh, who I don't think is with us today, from University of Maryland. As an example of dedication to this project, Chris Walsh has been retired since I think last August, but still hangs around, and I think Deanna Baldwin's in the room too, right? Yeah, another example. So we people just don't stop with NECAFS, so that's what you have in store for you. We've been able to hire a center administrator, as you all know, Elizabeth Newbold, who keeps us all moving in the right direction. The work within the network has really been broken down into 2 parts: the educational project teams, so for example, the training support stipend program, and the working groups focused on educational projects, which includes regulatory folks, so people with more of a regulatory role who also do educational work. We also have special topic teams. Initially, that was done through a competitive grants program called the Special Projects Grants Program. We've sunset that and are focused more on directly funded working group activity in this area. We also have additional staff now. We have David and Andrea, who are heading up the Preventive Controls for Human Foods work groups. And we have Hannah Doyle, who is heading up some needs assessment work related to produce safety. These are all activities that form a critical part of the agenda for the meeting. So the work groups will be informed by the work that's been done by these work groups over the past year, and the work for the next year will be informed by the discussions in the work groups. By the way, the way we have developed and the way this has evolved is very much based on feedback during this meeting and in the evaluations at the end of the meeting. So we value that greatly. Each one is looked at, even the comments that are inappropriate. So, quick summary of the past annual meetings. In 2016, Michael Patello and his crew hosted us in Boston, Massachusetts. We had 75 people. It was our first meeting. It was really informal. It was really about organizing, networking, getting to know each other, and getting to know what we were all doing. So it really was establishing this foundational structure. In 2017, we had a little bit more definition. We started defining the work groups, produce safety rule, preventive controls rule, focus, and then within those work groups, defining the work, the subgroups. At that meeting, we identified a need for a needs assessment and by our working groups as well. So going a little bit beyond the sort of educational focus of the PSR and PCHF. Last year in Albany, again, you can see that the meeting attendance has been growing each year. We broadened the tracks and the working groups, and we focused conversations on what should the work groups be doing in the coming year to gain traction and make progress. What are tangible next steps, and what are specific outputs? And this will be the theme again this year. We were successful in identifying specific work last year within work groups to get done. Much of that has been done. And again, so this year it's sort of a calibration, pausing, taking a look at what we did, getting a sense for what's still needed, doing some situational assessment of what is happening, and thinking about how we might retool and regroup. And so here we are in Philadelphia this year with, I think, 140 plus, which is wonderful. The rough structure for the meeting is we have a produce safety track and a preventive controls track, and then there are subgroups within each of those tracks, within each of those work groups, focused on these topics. And I'm going to go through each of these one by one by reviewing what we talked about last year and what we identified as goals. So in the produce safety educational subgroup, there was talk last year about creating a water testing lab map. That's been done. Thank you to Hannah Doyle, and also a great initial starting point from the folks at Michigan State University in the North Central region who developed an approach for using Google Maps to easily document what water labs exist where and what tests they do. Elizabeth will talk more about that in detail in a moment. Develop risk assessment tools for different commodities. We've been funded to do, NECAFS has been funded to do a project that we're calling the Decision Support Tool. It's an AFRI foundational project. Myself, Elizabeth, Betsy Bin, and Don Schaffner are heading that up, and that has just gotten underway to help develop some of these specific risk assessment tools. Encourage growers to start water testing and developing guidelines for washing and sanitizing bins are things that I think we'll regroup on during the produce safety work group, and we'll probably expand the conversation to talk about additional gaps, needs, and targeted resource development. And then explore the potential for states to define drop produce consistently across the region. This somehow was dropped, or I lost track of it anyway. But I suspect we'll regroup on it in the produce work group. Produce safety in the regulatory side, or the regulatory subgroup, gather deficiencies seen on farms following OFRR inspections across the region. This has largely been done through the OFRR work group. not a NECAFS OFRR work group, OFRR national work group, and we're very fortunate to have Meredith Melendez, who will be presenting on some of the shared common findings of OFRRs across the region and across the country today, to get a sense for what's still not happening and what do we need to do better on collectively to provide support for adoption. And the point is also to achieve some consistency across the region and to develop resource and educational programs based on priority and need. And so again, that's the action we have in this meeting, is to regroup on this, hear what Meredith has to say, and talk about what specific resources we should prioritize and who's going to do it. We also have a buyers subgroup, and some of the priorities identified last year for this area were to clarify audits versus inspections. There's another NECAFS project that has been started up, I guess, a little over a year ago, with funding from USDA National Ag Library through Vermont Law School to look at some of these legal questions related to FSMA implementation. This is one topic that a fact sheet's been developed on by that activity. And then develop a document for buyers that outlines standards for food safety and increase outreach to buyers. So there's a lot of individual state work being done in this area with outreach to buyers within each state and specifically related to state programs. We've also been able to get an FSOP, USDA Food Safety Outreach Program project funded for developing a buyer's handbook. So we have resources for produce growers, PSA curricula, OFRRs, and we have resources for food processors, the FSPCA curriculum, and samples, et cetera. We have identified, at least at last year's meeting, that there is a gap with buyer education. And so developing a handbook to try to bridge that gap was something that was identified, and we have a project started on that. Again, the buyers work group meeting will focus on what that handbook should look like and how it's being approached. In the Preventive Controls for Human Foods work group, there were 3 subgroups formed. There's an awareness subgroup, resources subgroup, and an evaluation subgroup. This activity is headed up by Dave and Andrea, and they'll run the breakout session for this group. Again, the main activity over the past year in this work group was a regional needs assessment. There really was nothing done previously to understand the needs specific to small processors in the region holistically. And so the point of this survey was to get a handle on where are we, and then get into what should we do about awareness, resources, and evaluation as a result of that. And so this work group will be reporting on findings from that regional needs assessment and also laying the foundation for the next year's work. Any comments or questions so far? Okay. Elizabeth's going to get into the NECAFS activities from the past year in more detail. Thanks.
So, Chris mentioned that we take the evaluations that you fill out very seriously, and we do. And last year, it was a very strong comment that people wanted to be reoriented at the beginning of the meeting, to be reminded of what we talked about the previous year and where we left the conversation and what were the next steps, and then to receive an update on what has happened over the past year so that we can all be oriented and ready to then discuss where we are and tackle existing challenges going forward into this coming year. And so Chris laid out what was discussed last year, how we decided what would be the next steps in those work group activities. And now I'll walk through and talk about what NECAFS has been doing over the last year on some of these things. What are some of the activities and where we are, so that now going into this afternoon and tomorrow, we can have a better informed discussion so everybody knows what the activities have been. So I'll walk through and talk about our activities from the last year. So one thing that was started was this pre-post test evaluation for the PSA grower training. This is a national initiative. We actually was started and formed by the Southern Regional Center at the University of Florida. And this is a test that everybody across the nation is using so that we can have a better understanding of knowledge gain from the PSA training on a national level. And so NECAFS is participating in this through the Training Support Stipend Program. And so for those who receive funding to deliver an educational PSA grower training, we're requiring that they administer this pre and post test and then generate the information back to us so we can contribute those findings to this national effort. And there's if you look in your conference program, there's a success story about the Training Support Stipend Program. Just so I can direct you to the specific page. Page 11 and 12, there's a success story about the Training Support Stipend Program. And then on page 13, there's an example in greater detail, so you don't have to try to read what's on the screen of this information. But how we're doing this is we have an Excel sheet, so you administer the tests, and then you send us back the Excel sheet with the answers in it, and we generate the information and do the analysis and send it back to you, and you'll see on the analysis a summary for the class by question, a summary for the class by module, and we also do a t-test for statistical significance, and we send that back to you with all of the analysis so that you can actually see. And if you've indexed your exams, then there's additional information within the analysis that you can actually see what the learning was by the individual attendee to your grower training. So there's information about this on our website. If you, like I said, if you're participating in the Training Support Stipend Program, then we ask that you do administer that, and I send that information every single time to you. So the next activity is the National Water Testing Lab Map. As Chris mentioned, this was identified last year as a need for doing a regional water testing lab map, and Hannah put that together, and then this fall, it was very clear that it needed to be national. It wasn't enough that it was just a regional map. And so you can see here that she has started to populate it with some of the information from the North Central region. This is under construction. She'll be working on it the rest of this winter and spring, but it is live. So you can follow this link to the go.uvm.edu/water lab map and start to pull information, and you'll see that it does grow over time as states start to continue to send Hannah information and it gets added to this map. The thing about this map is that it is a resource for growers so that they can go to it and find a lab near them that does at least one of the methods of testing for ag water testing for the produce safety rule. And all of this information has been verified, so labs need to opt in to be included. They need to fill out a survey that was developed by Michigan State. It gives all the up-to-date information, and then that's what's represented in the map. And so you can see here for adding labs, the link is go.uvm.edu/water test lab form. So if you go here and you see that there are labs in your state that are missing, it's because they haven't filled out the form to be included. So please encourage them to fill out that form. We don't just do it for them voluntarily. They need to do that. So keep visiting that. It will continue to grow. The next activity is the Preventive Controls Workgroup Support. So again, this was an area that we've been focusing on workgroup activity for the last couple of years and had a dedicated session at our annual meeting for PC work. And one of the things that was articulated early on was that there was really 3 areas of need within the PC workgroup, and that's awareness, evaluation, and resources. And those 3 subgroups formed, and we hired Dave and Andrea part-time to tackle that work, and they've been coordinating and facilitating that work for the last year. And as Chris mentioned, one of the big things this year has been a needs assessment of small and very small processors in the Northeast, looking at challenges and barriers for that group to implementation of FSMA. And that is what will be discussed in detail at the PC workgroup meeting this afternoon. The Extension Legal Services Initiative project with Vermont Law School. This is a partnership between NECAFS and the Center for Ag and Food Systems at Vermont Law School that began in late 2018. And the goal of this work is to identify, research, and provide educational resources relating to key legal questions associated with compliance with the FSMA Produce Safety Rule. And this project utilizes the skills of law students who are student clinicians at the Center for Ag and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. And I'm happy that we have two students with us here for the conference, Sam Ingram and Sedona Chavez, to contribute to the conversation. And this project is researching and creating educational fact sheets around several questions, including, but not limited to, liability, farm business formation, audits versus inspections, variances and alternatives, TAN, and FOIA requests. And Sedona will be presenting on some state implementation work that's going on in the buyer work group meeting. And we anticipate having educational material ready for release from this project in the coming months. It's coming quite quickly. A needs assessment systematic review. So this is for the produce safety aspect of things. And in Boston, actually in 2017, it was loud and clear we don't need any more needs assessments done. There's so many needs assessments that have been done. So can we actually just look at those needs assessments and summarize all of them into one location and distribute that information so that the region can benefit from that information collectively? And so Hannah actually did a literature review and reviewed all published needs assessments on produce safety work over the last 10 to 15 years, and has reviewed that and is presenting it in an exhaustive summary of information relevant to this topic. And she'll be presenting on that information during the needs assessment work group meeting tomorrow. And for those of you who have registered, I sent you reading ahead of time, so you can do that. Decision support tool. This is a project that was funded through USDA AFRI, and it aims to develop efficient decision-making tools for growers. This is a risk-based decision support tool used to create prioritized action plans specific to farms, operations, and hazards. And this tool will be working in conjunction with the already developed GAPS decision trees with the goal of increasing producer knowledge and improved decision-making. And again, this team is joined by Don Schaffner from Rutgers and Betsy Bin from Cornell. The online buyer handbook. So last year during the annual meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion about how there was a lot of variation in state implementation programs, as well as variation in voluntary accreditation schemes, which has resulted in a lot of communication challenges between buyers and growers when it comes to market access requirements. And so NECAFS received funding through the 2019 FSOP program to develop an interactive online handbook that gives Northeast produce buyers a clear snapshot of current produce safety landscape with relevant produce safety standards and local certification programs. And this project team includes Hans Estrin from University of Vermont and Wes Klein and Jen Matthews from Rutgers. And planning will kick off and take place during the buyer work group meeting tomorrow afternoon. Webinars. This has been going on since we started NECAFS, and many of you have participated or presented and been part of them. But these are topic based on needs that we hear from our network and what do people want to hear a webinar on. And all of these are recorded and archived on our YouTube channel and on our website, so you can go back and view them at any time. And then the Food Safety Resource Clearinghouse. This was has been live for almost 2 years now, but in the last year it was rebranded to better serve our national audience. So this is a curated source for produce safety and preventive controls related food related resources. And this was actually relaunched so that it served our national audience better. It was always meant to be national, but it had NECAFS branding, and so it appeared to be a bit of a Northeast tool. So now it's much more clear that this is a national clearinghouse and is open to posting and use by absolutely everybody. The other thing that we started doing in the last year was evaluating the Google Analytics for this page. And in your program, you'll see a summary of that information on pages 15 and 17. And we're using this to really understand how people are using resources, what resources are growing in demand, and better understand how people are finding the clearinghouse so that we can communicate what's on there most effectively. We're excited that in this coming year, we're going to be partnering with the Western Regional Center out of Oregon to incorporate a peer review process of add-on and supplemental material to the Food Safety Resource Clearinghouse. Okay, and so that's a summary of the activities from 2019 as a result of what was discussed at this meeting last year in Albany. Any comments or questions or points of clarification for anything? Okay, with that, we're going to jump into an evaluation activity. There are two of them, a card sort and spider web. And the overall objective of this activity is, I'll just revisit this. Chris opened with this in his presentation, but the highlighted in green, I just want to emphasize that the overall objective of NECAFS is to build a regional network infrastructure necessary to support a national food safety system that increases the understanding and adoption of food safety standards. And so why is that particular sentence important? Well, we are the network. All of you are our regional network. And this language of supporting a national food safety system and that increases understanding and adoption is actually a flexible statement. It's not static, and so that's changing. Our understanding of national food safety system is changing as we start to do inspections, as education continues, as we get guidance from FDA, as things develop in the field. And so it's our job as facilitators of this collaboration to make sure we are continually serving the needs of that changing landscape. And so we have a collaboration exercise that we're going to do today so that we can better inform our collaboration and make sure that we are being effective to you and your needs as you serve the growers and processors of the Northeast region. And so with that, where are the UMass students? Because I need your help. Can you come up here real quick? With that, we are now going to do a group exercise, and this will include the white envelopes that we handed out. But to start, I've got these wonderful UMass students. So if you guys see these guys, thank them. They've been wonderful and very helpful to me in getting everything oriented. They are handing out basically a poster board that's folded in half, and you can open it, and there's a picture of like a tree with some orange dots. That's not the side you want. You want to flip it over. Thanks, Chris. And you'll see, and this is meant for the table to share, so you can just set it somewhere that the table can see. Okay, so on that, in the upper left-hand quadrant of that poster, there's what's called a lattice, and you can see there's also a picture of it up on the screen. And you'll see on the left-hand side there are what's called levels. They're networking, cooperation, coordination, coalition, and collaboration. And then across the top, there are what are called elements: purpose, structure, and process. And what we aim to do with this exercise is gauge where NECAFS is within each of those elements. So that's the purpose, the structure, and the process. And the way that we're going to do that is you each have these these white envelopes that have a packet in them. If you do not have one, raise your hand, and the students will bring you one. And so what you do is if you take out what's inside this white envelope, you'll notice that there's a pack of cards of varying colors that are inside of 2 pieces of white folded paper. So if you unfold the paper and just pull out these colored cards, you'll orient yourself by looking at the bottom and see that it says card number 1 on the blue one. The second one is card 2 on the green one. The third is 3 on the white one. The fourth is number 4 on the yellow one. And the fifth is number 5 on the red one. Okay, and then it starts over with number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 11, 12, all the way through 15. And so you can see I've marked on the lattice on the PowerPoint that for purpose, it's cards 1 through 5. And the color structure is exactly the same, it just repeats itself. And then cards 6 through 10, you'll see starts with blue again. That'll be associated with the question on structure. And then 11 through 15 is associated with process. And so we're going to start with cards 1 through 5. And what this is, and the other thing I want to mention too, is that you can see I've noted on the PowerPoint, the blue dot goes with networking, the green with cooperation, the white with coordination, the coalition is yellow, and collaboration is red, and that's associated with the color cards that you have. Does that make sense? Is everybody following me so far? Okay, and so what you see on the lattice in that box that's associated next to networking and directly under purpose, you'll see 3 bullet points. That's just a summary of exactly what it says on this blue card. So it's the same language, just in summary form. It's the same for purpose and cooperation. So you'll see the information, so that's just a it's just restating the same information in a slightly different way so that you can if you have any need clarification on some of that stuff. So I just quickly want to point you to one of the white sheets that were folded around the cards says collaboration card sort. That's the one you'll need right now. And there's a bullet that says current state, and then it has a statement, and then it says currently purpose, structure, and process with a blank, and that'll be, you'll fill something in there, but I'll get to that in a minute. But that's the white piece of paper you need right now. So for the card sort exercise, the first thing that we're going to do is that each of you individually will look at cards 1 through 5, just taking cards 1 through 5, and you'll think to yourself, what is your perception of NECAF's purpose currently? And so you'll read through this, and you'll just from your interaction with NECAFs, your understanding of the work that we do, choose the card that you prioritize as being the current purpose of NECAFs. So what most accurately describes your highest priority for where NECAFs currently is? And this is just cards 1 through 5. Anything? And then once you've selected and so if you're reading through these cards and you think, oh, well, this kind of applies, and this kind of applies, and this kind of applies, what you need to do is select which one you think most accurately describes your highest priority for where NECAFs currently is. So you may think, oh, this applies, but really what you're looking for is you're just choosing one of the 5 of what accurately describes your highest priority for where NECAFs currently, our current purpose is. All right, so if everybody is done selecting, are there any questions? I'm hearing conversation start to like tune up, so I'm guessing people are done. Yeah, Hans? Sure. No, they're just similar. They're just meant to describe that activity a bit more. So let me go back to the lattice here. So you can see here, the theme of the blue card is networking. The theme of the green card is cooperation. The theme of white is coordination, coalition. So then language on each card and in that associated block of bullets next to it for purpose is just a description of networking. And the next one is a description of cooperation and alliance. And the next is coordination. So what you're supposed to do is just read the description on the cards and choose your highest priority for what NECAF's current activities are. Do you find that do you most value from NECAFs its networking? Do you most value from NECAFs currently its cooperation, its coordination, its coalition, or its collaboration? And then on those, it better defines what those things are so that you have a better and more complete sense of what they're trying to draw from each of those themes. Does that help, Hans? And this is what it is currently, how we are currently existing. Did you have a question, Michael? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so once you've selected, write down the color that you chose as your highest priority on that piece of paper next to purpose. And the cards are not identical. So when we finish this set, we're going to go to the next set, which is what is your perception of NECAFS structure currently? And it's the next set of cards, and the language is not identical. So for the next set, we are going to cards 6 through 10, starting with blue. And it's not identical to what you just read on the first series of cards. That's why you have 3 sets of cards. And you can see that the language, this is now, we first did purpose. What was the purpose of NECAFS, our current purpose? We're now thinking about the structure of NECAFS. So the current structure of NECAFS, and what is your priority for the current structure of NECAFS based on what's on those cards. And if you need sort of more guidance, that's what the lattice in the middle of the table is for. Any questions as we go through the second set for clarity? All right, how are you guys doing? Are we finished with that one, or do people need a few more, 30 more seconds? And then once you've chosen your top priority for that, write it down on your paper. Okay, and then the final one is, what is your perception of NECAFS process currently? And it's the third and final set of cards, so 11 through 15. Okay, so this is going to be the fun part, everybody. We're going to get up. And so write on the piece of paper the priority that you chose for the third purpose, or the process element that we just went through. And then what we are going to do is visually see where everybody, this is a spectrum, I didn't tell you that, but this is based on, because I didn't want to influence your choices, right? So when we went back, networking is the least engaged type of activity, all the way down to collaboration, which is the most engaged. So this is a range. And so that's great. And so the next of the process, and I think we probably need to be spaced out a little bit more, is there are the cards, and based on what you selected as your priority for NECAFS activity, for the first one, for purpose, we're going to get up, and you can see these students have the colors, and we might need to move, I feel like trying to track everybody into these clumps.
Maybe we can just do it as like a bar chart.
Yeah, do it as a bar chart. Line up with, or sort of group into your areas of the associated colors. So Daniel, do you want to just stop right there? It's perfect. He's got the blue, and here's green, white, yellow, and red. So we're going to actually get up out of your chairs, and we're starting with the very first one, so purpose. So reference your sheet, maybe bring it with you, of what you chose as your first color, and go to the associated block. And now I need someone to count how many of you there are. 0? Okay, so Chris, how many do you have at red? Chris is going to count red.
We're working on it.
Okay.
I got my best guy on it. 16.
Okay, very good.
17.
Okay. Can everybody who has the red please raise your hand? Okay. Count. Chris, count.
Michael counted. It's 17.
Okay, perfect.
18.
All right, so
19.
we have
18. Right. Yeah. We got
18
our
red.
some Iowa coming
Yellow. Can everybody with yellow raise your hand? 2. How interesting. Okay. Can we have white raise your hand? Incredible. Okay, how many? You said, Amanda?
Orange, I think,
That's good. That's good. An estimation is good. Okay, and then we've got over here blue. How many? 47 blue. Okay. And then the final one is green. How many you guys got? 8. Raise your hand. Beautiful. Okay, now we're going to do this again for the next one. So move to your color for structure. So the primary color you chose for structure. Can everybody with blue raise your hand? How many we have? Wow, just 4. Okay, so this is... Okay, and then we've got green. How many? Raise your hand. Incredible. All right, how many? Did anybody kind of guess? That's the majority by far. 10. Just quickly, I'll just say a lot. Okay. Most. All right, next we've got white. How many? Raise your hand. All right, Amanda says 44 white. Okay, yellow? 10, okay. And then red? 3. 10 yellow and 3 red. This is so interesting. Okay, and now let's move one last time. This one for process. Move to your primary color for process. Okay, and so for the last one, let's start with red. Can everybody with red raise your hand for process? How many of you are there? Red, 19. Okay, and yellow, raise your hands.
27.
Okay, wow. Yellow, and then white? 33. Raise your hand, white. 33. Okay. And then blue, 12, and green. 34? Okay, 34 green. All right, thanks, everybody. You can sit back down. That was great. Thank you, everybody, for doing that and bearing with me. So it would probably be responsible to put them all back in your little white envelope because we are going to do it again after I give you some more information. So to keep them in order, and you don't have to put them in your envelope if you don't want to, just to know that we will be using them again, so not to tear them into a million little pieces or something. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, why in the world did we just do that? And so I want to take a few minutes to go through with all of you sort of some planning and evaluation that we've been doing internally within NECAFS in the last year to better understand our work moving forward. And so after summarizing and reviewing the program evaluations from last year's annual meeting, we learned something really very interesting. So you may recall when you filled out your evaluations, we asked you to select your role within the produce safety community. So you would write educator, regulator, consultant, grower, processor, and so on. And so when we actually went through and evaluated all of the responses from the evaluation and we sorted them by role, we learned that the themes, so for this question, the theme is, what did you learn at the NECAFS annual meeting, actually aligned by the individual's identified role within the produce safety community and were not distributed evenly across the entire group at large. And so in other words, if you look at the first column where it says total attendees, and for if we're looking at the second example where it says that you learned state variation and implementation of FSMA, you can see that 22% of people articulated that. And if you stopped the analysis there, you would just assume that that was an even distribution again across the entire group. But when we sorted that information by role, we actually learned that it was the regulators that learned that, not the entire group at large. And if you kept going, you see the same thing for individual needs for growers, buyers, and processors, and that it was the educators that learned that, and not the entire group. And so that's particularly interesting. What that means is that educators and regulators are learning different things at our annual meeting, which is really quite fascinating. And so this tells us a story. And if we look at the next one, the next question of how has NECAFS helped you, thank you, Chris, improve your food safety outreach, training, and education, When we sort the responses by role, it's important to see again that educators and regulators benefit from NECAFS differently. And so while NECAFS helps educators improve food safety outreach training and education through networking leading to collaborative work, it helps regulators in general networking and communication leading to information sharing that informs decision making. So here we go. Networking that leads to collaborative work for educators versus more general networking and information sharing that leads to informed decision-making for regulators. And so that makes sense as educators focus on education and outreach and project development, where regulatory folks focus on enforcement and decision-making. But even more interestingly, as we went back and we resorted the data from the 2019 annual meeting, and we did it by role, and this alignment did not occur. Everything that was learned was general and evenly distributed across the group. So why do we care? And why does any of this matter? Well, it's because you may recall that last year the annual meeting was structured differently. Instead of a lot of general session, we did more work group activities and broke out into working meetings. And this was done as direct feedback from the group in 2018 and in a survey that we distributed ahead of the meeting. And we heard loud and clear from everybody that they wanted concurrent work group meetings that focused on specific topics. And so last year we tailored our program to meet those needs. And so then what we saw in our evaluation was that you responded that you learned specifically based on the session that you attended. And this is important because you learned specific and contextual information instead of general overarching information. And so this is important to NECAFS because when we were first formed in 2016, as Chris mentioned, from that initial group in Amherst and then into the FDA-funded NECAFS, the structure was set up based on evaluation from that network that you wanted specific tailored programming built to address detailed needs articulated by the network. And so what this shows us is that has actually started to happen and that you are getting this tailored specific information based on what you've articulated to us is your need. And so I think this is really, really super exciting. And what that means to us is that it is validating that early preliminary evaluation as well as anecdotal conversation about what NECAFS should do and how it should function to serve you, our network, and our audience. And so in order to build on that, this past summer we conducted a lit review on collaboration theory to understand what are the strengths of NECAFS, why does it work, and how can we actually build and inform upon that so that we can grow and be a better regional center next year and the year after that. And so where that led us was to better understand the necessary criteria to form a successful collaboration. And so in order to have a successful collaboration, you need to have the right criteria in place to begin with. If the criteria doesn't exist, then a collaboration is not going to be created. Now, the thing about it is it's not just about the criteria. You can have the criteria, but you have to treat a collaboration like a living and breathing organization that needs the reevaluation and reassessment to ensure that it continually serves the needs of its audience. And so that's what we're doing with these exercises. We're reevaluating and reassessing our framework to ensure that it is meeting your needs so that you can better serve your audience of the producers and processors across the region. And so I think it's just sort of interesting to go through some of the criteria that's necessary to form a collaboration. There is a lot of criteria, and I'm just going to walk through some of the ones that are particularly important to NECAFS and why I think it's such an incredible group and why this framework has worked so well. So the first is the stakeholder group must be comprised of the right mix of individuals, which is determined by the aims and goals of the collaboration. And that's really exactly what NECAFS is. It's a collection of autonomous yet interdependent individuals that need to work together to tackle a complex and uncertain situation. And so in this changing world of FSMA and an evolving landscape, we have all of the players in the room: regulatory, education, consultants, some growers, processors, buyers, community-based organizations, and everybody who has an individual role within this landscape is in the room having a conversation about how to collectively tackle the complex issues of this evolving FSMA landscape, which is really quite unique. Stakeholders work interdependently to identify common needs and develop shared solutions that draw from their individual competency domains while maintaining autonomy. And so this is a little bit of a variation on the first bullet, but really what this is that everybody brings their individual expertise to the conversation and their perspectives and their point of view, which then informs the entire conversation. The other thing that this, it doesn't say in this specific definition, but an important element of this is perspective. And so we all bring different perspectives, which is incredibly important to ensure that when we're making decisions, we have the entire picture. We have the whole picture. We understand everybody's perspectives. And a lot of times we get lost in the day-to-day activities, which can result in a lot of siloing. But what NECAFS is meant to do is to facilitate everybody coming back together, having open conversation, working conversation, where those perspectives and those individual individual local important aspects are articulated, so that when we come to a solution on how to move forward, it's informed by all of that within the room. And so that's a particularly important one, and I just wanted to emphasize the importance of perspective in that bullet. The next is to acknowledge and consider salient local features, and this is again similar in that we all have our individual programs, we all have our individual growers, we all have individual needs that are specific. Nothing across our region is the same. I imagine if you were in the northern point of Maine, it would look very different than the southern point of Maryland, and that you wouldn't have the same conversation with those people about this same exact issue. And so taking into consideration that variation and those local, that local context when we're making decisions is very important. And then the last one that I wanted to emphasize is just that collaboration fosters new roles in and policy in support of institutional development and change. And this is particularly, what this is speaking to is that informs decision making. So you come together, have these conversations, understand this perspectives, and then go back and it informs decision makings within your institution. And so the idea is that if a collaboration is successful, it is the conversation that you have and the decisions that are made actually result in institutional change when you're back home. So it actually informs your decisions and it informs the way that you might tackle a problem because you've had this exposure and this conversation with the entire group. And I think that's what we see in the evaluations where the respondents did say that it did inform decision making. Okay, so I find this to be super fascinating and interesting, and I appreciate that I can share this with you. And the other thing that I wanted to emphasize is that collaboration is a term that's often used to describe a lot of elements within the collaboration spectrum that don't actually mean collaboration. So collaboration is often used to describe what is often what's often cited as the C words. So communicating, connecting, cooperation, consulting, coordinating, co-locating, community building, and contracting. And all of those elements are actually foundational to get to collaboration. So collaboration is a progressive timeline. It takes time to establish a true collaboration. And so if we look back at the presentation, and Chris described how in the first couple of years, we really focused on establishing foundational structure and doing those types of things, communicating, connecting, cooperation. And what that is doing is it's building trust, it's creating common language, and it's creating an atmosphere so that when we then get to the point where these foundational structure is in place, that's when long-term planning, sharing, and co-development of strategies can actually occur. And that is what we have seen. So in the first 2 years, we were establishing the foundation, we were developing these work groups, we were communicating, and then last year, we started to see project outputs articulated, and then they took off in the last year. So we're starting to see a true collaboration now, and this is at the point where we're stopping and reflecting and ensuring that it is actually meeting the needs of all of you, our target audience. And so the final thing, and I just will reiterate this again, is that the important thing about a collaboration is that we remain flexible and we recalibrate. And so I said it's a living, breathing organization because it is built to respond to a changing and complex landscape. And so I think of it as interval training. It is important for you to take this is an example of an interval training. So the idea of interval training is that it has a downtime, so it gives your body the opportunity to rest and relax before it takes on to the next challenge. And then again, it drops off so that you can rest and relax before you take on to the next challenge. And that's what we're doing with these collaborative exercises. This is our time to stop, reflect, and relax, and actually receive the feedback from this group in order to inform the next uphill climb for NECAFS, and we'll drop off again and rest and relax at the end of next year after we've finished this work to ensure that we are still continuing to meet your needs. And so that is the point of these exercises that we're doing. And I wanted to just emphasize this because I think it's a really incredible story about the work that all of you have done in bringing all of this together. And thinking about the connections that have formed, not only of sharing of resources, but now you are all co-teaching with each other across the region. You're serving on each other's advisory boards for different projects. There are now grants that are collaborative across states that would not have otherwise been. And so there's just a lot of activity that's going on out there as a result of this early work of communicating and connecting. And so I just wanted to really take the time to emphasize that and describe the good work that you're all doing. And so with that, the next thing that we wanted to do is what's called a spider web for sustainability exercise. And what this is doing is this is actually assessing the long-term sustainability of NECAFS. And NECAFS is, the structure of NECAFS and the work that we do. And so what you have is another white piece of paper that it's a two-sided piece of paper. On one side, there's a spider web with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the front, there are definitions. So let me go to the next slide. And if you look at this spider web, you'll see on the outer ring, there are 6 elements listed. And these are 6 elements of NECAFS that we would like to assess specifically. And so the first is reach. And what that means is successfully reaching the intended population. And you are our intended population. We're not talking about growers and processors. We're talking about you guys as technical service providers and regulators and community-based organizations, the interface between us and the growers and processors. The next is strong collaboration. NECAFS forged strong partnerships. The next is community support. The project has generated enthusiasm and commitment by the community. That's you. Community fit. The project is being implemented in ways that impacts the needs and culture of the community. Again, you guys are the community. You are our community, so we're thinking about you in this exercise. Purpose and vision. The purpose and vision are articulated, and as the project evolves, the purpose becomes more defined. And then implementation quality. The project is being implemented with a commitment to quality, coordination, and delivery. And so I've summarized it on the slide, but if you turn over your spider web, there's the definitions in even longer sentences if you want them. And so what we are doing with this exercise is there should be a series of blue dots on each table, 6 blue dots. Does somebody find 6 blue dots? Does every table have a series of 6 blue dots? there should just be one tape of 6 blue dots on each table. And so this is going to be a group conversation among your table. And what we're doing here is that for each of the elements, so the elements are reach, community fit, purpose and vision, implementation, community support, and strong collaboration, you will discuss as a table, and then with one of the blue dots, number on the line within that quadrant. So you can see, I'll go back. Reach is that upper left-hand quadrant. You'll take one blue dot and assess how, in your opinion, is NECAFS functioning in that area on 1 to 5, and you can see 1 is poor functioning and 5 is functioning very well. And then you'll do that for the next collaboration, for the next community support, implementation, purpose, and vision. So each quadrant has one blue dot based on your table's consensus, and you will place, and actually what we've done is after you have decided amongst your table, we have enormous spider webs hanging on the wall. And so just designate somebody from your table to get up with the blue dots and mark them on any of the spider webs. It doesn't matter. We just have 4 for ease of use. And then you would just mark on one of these spider webs where your table decided NECAFS was functioning within each of these elements. Are there any questions? Does that make sense? So you'll walk through each element, have a group discussion at your table about where you think NECAFS is currently functioning, rate it from 1 to 5, and then designate an individual from your table to go up to one of these spider webs. There are 4 placed around the room, and put the dot within the quadrant on the scale for each of those elements. Does that make sense? Yes? I see heads nodding. Okay. So go ahead, and we're going to give you 10. So let me just tell you, you get 10 minutes for all 6 total. So you get 10 minutes for 6 total. So maybe just use a couple minutes per element just to make sure you get through them all. It's just a quick conversation. So go ahead, and I'll let you know when 10 minutes is up.
Let's just take a second, and I'm curious whether anybody had any reflections from that activity. And let's do it just generally first. Anything come up at the table that you think others should hear? Yep, Don.
There we go. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting for me, so at this table we have one person from New Jersey, one person from Pennsylvania, and everybody else from Delaware. And so one of the things that we struggled with is coming up with an answer. Like the answer for New Jersey might be one thing, and the answer for Delaware might be another. And then how do you integrate the opinions of like, you know, given that we weren't all equally represented at the table. But we managed, we struggled through.
And that's a good segue into the next step, which will be individual voting. So your individual perspectives should not be lost. Thank you. Other thoughts, Abby?
Yeah, so at our table, we wanted to identify or define what the community was, what the audience was, and so we made the assumption that the community was the network, not that the community was the industry or the produce community. So if people define community differently, they may have answered the questions differently.
Thanks very much. That's actually the discussion that I dropped in on that prompted this sort of impromptu reflection session, because at the Rhode Island, Connecticut table, that came up. You know, what is, when we talk about reach as well, you know, what's the boundary of the audience we're talking about? Who are we trying to reach? So I'd like to hear some more about that. Lori, would you be willing to share? I like you so much. That's why I want to hear you.
You're his favorite. Well, I think what we discussed was, so we're always thinking about this group with the clearinghouse and everything as the regulators and the educators and that sort of thing, but we have folks here, incubator kitchens, folks out there that have people that they need to reach. And so I think we do need to do a better job reaching out to them, because quite honestly, they're the ones that are, we have a tough time targeting small processors, for example. They're the ones that are really reaching those small processors, because they're the ones that are giving them the information and coddling them and trying to help them. So I think that they're a good example of that. network that we need to do a better job.
And what about on, sorry, go ahead, Hans.
So most of our conversation was spent where we had a big range in the scores of like 2 to 5 or something like that. So and it was, I think, almost always about the fact like purpose and vision was one where the structure, the purpose, vision, really well articulated. Seemed a lot of like 5, bang, we got it. We're like and. We had some 2s, which were, well, we haven't actually grown into that. We haven't put skin in the game with projects, and that's a maturing kind of thing. So that's an interesting reflection, is that a lot of what an organization does is sets a form that you have to grow into or put skin in the game into over time, and that takes time, takes investment, and that's how the identity grows.
Thanks. We're still a toddler. The best is yet to come. Other thoughts from the activity? Something to share? Sounds like it. Come on, Maine.
Maine's here. We always speak up. Yeah, we had some conversation at our table. We have a lot of folks who are new to NECAFS, and so, answering any of these questions is difficult. We have folks from out west who have a different perspective of NECAFS, and we also had a conversation at our table about some of the farm service provider ecosystem of like those folks aren't necessarily part of the reach, and there are a lot of organizations in Pennsylvania and Maine and other places where we kind of need those folks to be part of the conversations, and right now there's not a ton of them in the room.
Chris, one observation I had was thinking about what our responsibility as people in this room to this process. For example, reach who's not in the room, and what's our responsibility to help get them in the room. I think, it's easy to look to you, organizers, to make this all successful, but this is our network, so it would be an interesting conversation to have at some point about what our responsibilities are as members.
Thanks. A good sort of point back to this. If you know of other organizations that should be here, let's talk about getting them here. We're glad to support that, but we may be blind to their need to be here. Other thoughts?
So piggybacking off of that last comment, I think maybe there could be one more bullet point as adaptability, the ability to, for members to have impact.
Thank you, Carl. Last call, at least for this exercise. We know we'll hear from you. What's that? For this part of the exercise, that's right.
Great. Thanks for that conversation. So the next thing is we're sticking with this still. You each should have received 2 red dots in your white envelope. So every single person will have 2 red dots. If you do not have them, raise your hand and we'll get you some. So that now with the red dots, what we're doing is you were asked in that previous exercise to think about it collectively as a group, and now these are going to be your individual reflections. And so what you're going to do with those red dots, and you're going to do this on these bigger boards on the wall, but what we're going to ask you to do is to choose 2 of the elements in the spider web and choose your priority for where NECAFS should focus. And it can be anywhere on that spectrum, again, of 1 to 5. And the idea is that you're just thinking about 2 of those elements of the 6. You're going to think that those are the priority for where NECAFS should focus, and then choose where within the functioning spectrum we should be. So maybe you don't think we do anything at all yet with purpose and vision, but we should start focusing on that. And in the next year, you'd like us to see us be at least a 2 Or maybe you think we're already doing that, and in the next year, that's what we should focus on and bring ourselves up to a 5. Is that clear? So you're thinking about it from an individual perspective, from your own personal point of view, what is the priority of those 2 elements and where should we be on the spectrum? And then every single person will get up and vote on one of the 4 spider webs, and try not to stick it on top of someone else's. You can overlap it, but just so we can see where they are on the spider web. So take 7 minutes to think about that. Yeah, did you have a question, Bill? Yeah, on the spectrum of 1 to 5. Yep, and Carl, was there another question? Yep. Where we should be, where you think we should be. No, where you think we should be, where NECAFS should focus in the future on 2 specific elements, and then where in that 1 to 5 we should find ourselves in a year. Yes, in the future. So, do you want to elaborate on this? I mean, the idea is that people may be asking themselves, why wouldn't you be at a 5? Why won't everybody just put it on a 5 for for an element that you've chosen? But the thing is that what you're thinking about is maybe from your individual perspective, we have not done much with community reach, let's say, for example, and you think that in the next year, NECAFS should really focus on that, but recognizing that you can't get to a 5 in 12 months, you say, I want you to at least be at a 2 or a 3 on that particular element. So that's why there might not be everybody on a 5. Does that make sense? Alternatively, if you think, oh, you're already doing a good job with purpose and vision, but I currently have you in my head at a 3, I think you should focus on that and prioritize that work, and next year I want to see you at a 5. Is that clear?
So one way to think about it is by placing a dot on any of these 6 axes, you are already saying we're not doing enough, right? So you're voting really at 2 levels. One is you need to do work in this area, and the other is by next year I want you to at least be here. So that's how I will interpret it.
Yep.
That's right. The assumption is with that individual vote, we're not there now. Yeah.
And we'll just take a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, so thank you for that. I'm going to pull everybody back to their tables because we're not quite to break yet. We just have 15 more minutes, and then we'll go to break. But I appreciate, has everybody had an opportunity to vote from a personal standpoint? Okay. So what we're going to do now is, this will go much, much faster than it did the first time. So now, in having heard all of this and having had these group discussions, we're going to go back to the card sort exercise. So those cards that were in your white envelope. And we are going to do this exercise again, but before you did it from a current perspective, what is NECAFS currently? And now you're going to think about it from what is NECAFS purpose in the future. What should it be? So again, you're going to look at those cards starting with 1 through 5, and you're going to select the color that shows what your perception of NECAFS purpose should be. And then write that down back on that first piece of paper that you had. You'll see at the bottom there's a future/should-be element. And this time we'll just give you 90 seconds to make a selection. Yep. We're starting with 1 through 5. Same thing. The card sort with the card stock starting with blue, 1 through 5. Yes, the first piece of paper where you wrote down the color you chose, return to that piece of paper, and on the bottom half there's a future should be with some blanks, and you can write your color. And again, we're doing purpose. What should it be in the future? And we're just going to go through this fast.
If anybody's wondering why we're doing this and what might come of it, the plan is to actually take the data that's represented here and try to crunch it and summarize it tomorrow.
Sort of.
So we're going to try to turn it around and have some clarity from these activities, at least initially, for everybody tomorrow before we leave.
Yep. Okay, and then now move to cards 6 through 10 and do it again. And this is, what is your perception of what NECAF's structure should be? Okay, and so lastly, take the third deck, starting with 11, card number 11, and write down, what is your perception of what NECAF's process should be? Okay, finish that up, and then you guessed it, we're going to do the grouping again so that we can gauge where the number on each of the elements people voted for this one. So if everyone is finished, you can pick up your paper, and then we're going to go to the first color for what you chose for the perception of NECAF's purpose and what that should be, and go back. The colors will be in the same location. Okay, everybody with a red card, please raise your hand. Awesome. Chris, count. Incredible. Red is the most collaborative color, just so you know. What? 58. Okay, how about yellow? Raise your hands. 11. White? Can you raise? Wow, you guys are quick. 40. Blue? Raise your hands. How many? 12. Okay, and then green? 8. Wonderful. All right, let's move to the next one. So now we're going to your color for structure. Okay, let's start with blue. Okay, 1 blue. How about green? Can you raise your hand? How many we got? 19 greens. White? Raise your hand. 32. And then yellow? 36 and red. Raise your hands. 29. Okay, and now let's go to the last one. So where we are for process, the color you chose for process. Hey, Andy, where's Andy? I don't see him. Are we staying put long enough for you to capture pictures or not? Okay. Roger, you're the lone blue. All right, are we all where we need to be? Let's start with blue. 1 blue. All right, green? 5 green. White? 13? 13 white and yellow. Raise your hands. This is 47. All right, and red? This is great. $55. Okay. Have a seat, everybody. Thank you.
Appreciate everybody's willingness to play and to contribute to those evaluation exercises. Like I said, the next steps on that are for Elizabeth and I and some of the UMass students to collect that data together and try to summarize it for tomorrow. And then that'll be an initial review of it, and we plan to do more with it in the next month or so to chart the course for the coming year and beyond. So framing the meeting for today and tomorrow, I just wanted to talk about the agenda briefly. You do have it in your program in more detail than this. We do have plenty of breaks planned in the process over the course of the agenda, the first one coming up today at 10:30. We'll be back here for project updates, and then we'll have lunch. And this afternoon, we have the first 2 tracks of work group meetings. In the produce safety work group meeting in the Independence Ballroom, and the preventive controls for human foods work group meeting in the Head House Tower Lounge. That second one, the preventive controls for human foods meeting, is up on the 9th floor in the elevators down this way. So you need a room key to get to the 9th floor. Just be with somebody who has a room key. We then have a post-reception reception tonight at 5 o'clock in the outside hallway, which we look forward to having everybody attend. And then dinner is on your own. We're in a great area of Philadelphia with lots of superfood options. So hope everybody has a chance to connect over dinner tonight in the neighborhood or beyond. Tomorrow we start at 8 o'clock with breakfast and federal updates. So breakfast will be the program will occur over breakfast. So we have some updates from the FDA, USDA, some of our regional center partners and other national partners. Over breakfast at 9:30, we again break into work group meetings. Excuse me. With the buyers work group and the produce safety needs assessment work group. We regroup at 12:30 for lunch, and then at 1:30 we'll have work group report outs. And so this is a key thing to remember. As we're going through and having the work group meetings, we will have folks taking notes. The very busy students from UMass who are helping us out will be serving as note takers during those meetings. If you're a work group facilitator, one of your roles in addition to facilitating the work group meeting, thank you for doing that, is also to come back and try to summarize what happened in those meetings. That can be tricky, so it's key points. We're not looking for minutes. It's the key points from the meeting and any major revelations or key discussion points and next steps. And again, we will take time after the annual meeting to digest the notes more fully and talk with the facilitators to map out the goals for the coming year. And then we'll wrap things up around 3 o'clock tomorrow and send everybody on their way. I wasn't showing that slide the whole time. Sorry. So the expectations for the meeting, a couple of sort of guiding principles. Everybody has said they enjoy the annual meeting as a chance to connect in person, connect with existing partners, people you already are working on projects with, but also to connect with new collaborators and peers and making new connections. Asking questions. It's been great to have the engagement we've had this morning. Thank you, and keep that going. I think the work group meetings in smaller settings will also help bring more questions out. Share resources and experiences. Something that you have had and have done for a long time and that you think is really not terribly exciting could be just the thing that somebody sitting next to you needs. So share your experiences, share your resources, make people aware of what you've been up to that they might be able to use, engage in the discussions. The work group approach is really meant to provide this critical in-person time to try to move some of these topics and issues along through dialogue. We want to promote co-discovery. I think we've already had some this morning with respect to reach and community fit, and I think that's just one example. There is a lot going on, a lot of nuance in this that I think we can make some progress on together if we're working if we're together in a room. And to hatch new plans and projects. We're going to hear in the produce safety work group, for example, about a pretty exciting initiative that some partners at the FDA are kicking off with respect to a research consortium, a research-focused, a discussion focused on what research, key research questions might need to be answered in order to advance practice on the farm and in the processing facility. So, the other guiding principles I'll give in the work groups is, this is mainly for facilitators to keep in mind. We want to encourage engagement for those who are participating. If you're often the first one to speak or the one to speak most frequently, maybe make some room. If you're often less eager to speak or more quiet, try to stretch, try to speak up. Consider the rule of three. Allow 3 other people to speak before you speak again. If you've spoken once, wait for 3 people to speak. I never follow that one. I'm asking you to. Facilitators focused on facilitating, so we're going to need some help with timekeepers. So as facilitators kick off the sessions, try to find somebody in the room who can help you keep tabs on your time. And also make sure we have note takers. And I believe we have the UMass students to help with that, but let's just make sure. And then remember that we're going to be reporting out to the larger group on day 2. The other thing, we've said it before, Elizabeth and I really do cherish everybody's feedback on this event and on NECAFS in general. We do try to read every single one and every single comment and understand it and try to put any suggestions into practice that we possibly can. We will have a paper evaluation, and we would love to have 100% participation in that from this group to make sure we're hearing from you and to make sure that we're making this event and everything NECAFS does really relevant and purposeful for you.